The Spotlight on Damp and Mould, It's Not Lifestyle report, published in October 2021, firmly placed the responsibility for resolving poor quality housing in the hands of social landlords. It provided 26 recommendations for landlords to self-assess their approach to resolving cases of damp and mould. Regardless of cause, the impact on residents living with damp and mould is extensive and overwhelmingly negative. A year after the Spotlight report's publication, the coroner's report into the death of 2-year-old Awab Ishaq was released, prompting the Ombudsman to write an open letter to all landlords to address poor conditions within social housing. In February of this year, the Ombudsman published a follow-up report to provide insight into landlords' responses to the 2021 report and the coroner's report. This latest report included a number of actions which landlords have taken as a result, including improving surveying equipment, use of sensors to predict mould growth and to analyse its root cause, use of a dashboard, and introducing resident-facing apps. We'll be hearing more about these actions shortly. Just to flag, we'll be hosting another webinar on the 10th of May, sharing some of our experiences with social landlords in identifying and resolving damp and mould issues, particularly in the light of recent events. More details will be provided following this event. Today's speakers are going to give us a run through of the outputs from the report, as well as some examples of best practice. We'll have around 15 to 20 minutes at the end of today's session for Q&A, so please start getting your questions in the Q&A section. You'll also be able to upvote other attendees' questions, so if there's something someone else has asked that you really want to hear the answer to, then just give it a vote and that'll move it to the top of the list. So first up, I'd like to welcome Victoria King, Sector Learning and Development Lead from the Housing Ombudsman. Welcome, Victoria.
Hello, thank you, Sam. Let me just share my screen, and if you could just confirm that that's come through all okay, that would be absolutely marvellous.
Yeah, we can see that. That's great.
Great, thank you very much. Oh, that's my Teams chat. Okay, so as Sam mentioned, my name is Victoria King. I am the Learning Development Lead at the Housing Ombudsman. I sit within a department called QED, which is for Quality, Engagement and Development. And what we do in our department is, and the aim of our work is to share the insights and learning from complaints. So what we're doing is we're constantly looking at our complaint data to identify themes and trends and one-off instances of learning that everybody can benefit from. We also monitor compliance with our complaint handling code compliance work. So everyone that's a member of the Housing Ombudsman has to abide by our complaint handling code. So we monitor that and to make sure that everyone who is a member is complying with that. And then we use that work to inform and carry out systemic and thematic investigations. So one of the ways that we do, and we publish those results of those systemic and thematic investigations, is through what we call spotlight investigations. And the damp and mould report is one of those. Other spotlight reports we've done have included heating and hot water and energy in social housing. We produced one on noise last year, and of course, while we're here today, damp and mould. So I'll talk a little bit about the original spotlight investigation and report on damp and mould, which came out in October 2021. So just as an overview, what is a spotlight investigation? Well, it's not about league tables or having somebody to blame. So we're not pointing out who's the most terrible damp and mould complaint handling and repairs. It's not about that. It's about taking the learning from complaints and drilling down into the root cause of what the systemic and thematic issues might be occurring and working collaboratively with landlords to address issues that are causing complaints. So how do we get our data to inform the spotlight report? So we use casework intelligence from the complaints we receive, but also we issue calls for evidence from those within the sector. So we've recently, we're in the process of completing another spotlight report on knowledge and information management. We put out a call for evidence at the end of last year, and we're currently working on that. So we have it open for a period of time and to try and get as much engagement from the sector for each of these reports. We also speak with sector experts, landlords and residents too, to give us a fully rounded picture of what is happening, so we can get all of the information together that we can before producing the reports. So then once we've been to all of those people, we take all of that information, we review it, and we come up with recommendations to address any of the key issues that have been found. And then once the report is published, we monitor performance and produce follow-up reports. So with this damp and mould report, the initial report came out in October 2021. And then more recently, in February 2023, we produced our follow-up report. So again, on the original report, we found that landlords often have a more reactive approach to tackling damp and mould rather than being proactive. So we often see with complaint handling that it's not resident focused, and that landlords needed to change their culture as to stop dealing with the issues and be more proactive. So rather than dealing with it on a case by case basis, landlords are going out, seeking out potential issues and establishing process to get ahead of any of the issues. So what we found was that there was a slow reactive response in this. We also found that it often starts with blaming the resident. So you don't open your windows, you're drying your socks on the radiator, rather than actually starting from a position of taking responsibility for the issue. So whilst lifestyle may be a tiny factor, or it might be a small factor, there are loads of other things that it could be contributing to damp and mould, and landlords need to take on responsibility for mitigating against these and investigating them properly, rather than spending so much time focusing on blame and not on the fabric of the building and protecting it from deterioration, for example. So rather than just accept that damp and mould just happens, we want to see, and we've recommended that there is a zero tolerance approach to the issue. And when we spoke to residents about damp and mould, they use words such as tiring, time consuming, hostile attitude, and feeling that landlords just don't care. So we talk about a culture change, and one resident we spoke to said there was a culture of not caring, and this is people's lives. These are the houses they live in. You know, you go home to get away from the world, and when you're living with something like this, it's you need to feel like your landlord is being more proactive. So the key recommendations from the report, there were 26 original recommendations. We've talked about these in the follow-up report as well. We can broadly put them into 4 categories. So being more proactive, taking responsibility, focusing on the fabric, and a zero tolerance culture. So looking at the proactive column then, find your silence. So when you have a dispute resolution and a complaint system, people can raise their issues quickly and get them addressed quickly. So, but what about those people that you're not hearing from? So landlords, we recommend that they find out who's not using those services and why they're not. So who are you not hearing from? So finding your silence. Some landlords also see complaints as a bad thing, but actually high complaints about damp and mould can be a sign that you're open and transparent, and people, your residents, can feel that they can complain to you. So I attended some training a few years ago, and they said that a complaint is a golden nugget, and there's so much information and so much learning that can be identified and then action planned and turned into lessons learned by analysing the complaints. So, but you also need to find out who isn't complaining and why they're not, so you can make sure that you're being proactive. So another part of the proactive recommendation is that landlords have more of a proactive communication strategy. So selling successes, it's not something which landlords are good at doing in this sort of space. They're good at doing in this sort of space, but residents have no idea about what the landlords are doing. So it would be better to have more of a communications strategy with the residents to provide advice in a helpful and understandable way using multiple formats. So thinking about your demographics, knowing about your residents, and providing information in an accessible way. Not everybody is digitally enabled, not everybody has English as their first language, so thinking about how can you reach your residents, and communicating with them, having open communication channels. So another point on here, have a damp and mould strategy and a framework for response. So look wider than an individual report of damp and mould. So, so looking at what other cases of damp and mould have we got? Are they in the same building? Are they in the same types of residences? Using those void periods between residents living in a space to actively check the property and make sure that it's been damp and mold proofed, and anything that has arisen in that property has been dealt with before somebody else just moves in. The other thing is really important and comes down to empathy skills really, but the treating people fairly. It's not people's fault that they live in a building that has damp and mold. It might be, I was speaking on an event yesterday, and there was a lady who lived in a listed building in the basement flat, and that was the place that she was allocated, and her landlord wouldn't treat the damp and mold, and it had gone through several complaints. It's not people's faults that they live in those types of buildings. So another example is if that building is particularly old and it's marked for regeneration or disposal, if they're waiting to move into a newer property, it's not their fault that they live in that building at the moment. So do everything that you can to support them. Don't just say, well, it's going to be knocked down in a year's time. Why would we bother? That's be fair to people. This is where they live. So another point is about empowerment of staff at landlords. So signposting staff to the Chartered Institute of Housing's professional standards if they've not already done so. And the government is actually moving more towards this now, with managers having to have at least a level 4 certificate and executives having to have a level 5 certificate in the CIH's professional standards. A level 5, of course, being a foundation degree, so it's at quite a high level of qualification, as well as giving landlords and staff time to continually professionally develop. So once you've got that qualification, you're continually updating your skills, knowledge on the sector. Then we want to see appropriately skilled contractors and staff. So the initial diagnosis of damp and mould is really important, and it needs to be done right. So on some occasions, there might need to be a specialist or expertise in diagnosing a problem, structurally and non-structurally, and that resident needs to be confident and have a good understanding of the diagnosis first time, so they're confident, they know that you're being, as a landlord, you're being proactive in dealing with the issue. Another point is about net zero. So check that there are no unintended consequences in net zero plans. So has retrofitting and insulating played a part in actually not letting airflow happen, so it's causing a mold problem? But also thinking about, we're in a fuel crisis at the moment where people are in fuel poverty, and electrical heating costs can cost more than gas. So it might be that your green drive pushes people into more of a fuel poverty. So just something else to consider there. The next spotlight report we're producing is around knowledge and information. We've got here about record keeping. It's mundane, but it's essential. So adopting an intelligence-based record keeping, and allowing a system where if one case of damp and mold is happening, that is recorded on a system that others within that landlord organisation can see. So you know that this particular block of flats has damp and mold issues. It's about tying up all of those loose ends. So I've got down here how you know, how does your left hand know what your right hand's doing? It's got to make sure that you've got your record keeping up to date, and that staff know what's happening with regards to complaints. So it's almost an acceptance in the sector because it's so common. So that's why we're producing the next report on knowledge and information management. So when a resident reports damp and mould, it's really important that you follow up and keep them updated as to what's going on with the report. You don't want them to think that they're forgotten about. They're living with this every day. So the onus is on the landlord really to own the case. And if it's something that is long term, what are you doing about it in the short term? What mitigations are you putting in place? How are you helping the resident? Be robust in using the complaints process until such time as proceedings are filed. And knowing your stock, so structural factors like property age, design, modifications. So there are certain types of properties like converted street properties, building of concrete construction, or traditional solid type construction that are more susceptible to damp and mould than others. And they can require significant investment to address the issues. So knowing what stock you've got as well. And finally, knowing your residents. So occupancy factors might include overcrowding and the availability and use of heating and ventilation systems, but they also include individual circumstances. So are your residents suffering from financial hardship? Have they got health conditions or a disability? So getting to know your residents. So there was a few questions which we brought up for governance. So it's not just about the lessons for landlords, but for governing bodies as well. And before something comes to the Ombudsman, check that you've got a good government procedure in place. So the questions for governance would be, do you have a proactive net zero tolerance approach to damp and mould and a comprehensive consolidated policy or framework for responding to these cases? Are you considering damp and mould as part of your net zero strategy? How effective and timely are we at responding to and resolving reports and complaints concerning damp and mould? And how do we know we are providing meaningful information to support our residents? How they go about identifying and managing complex cases or situations and those involving perhaps legal disrepair claims? Are we promoting our complaints processes enough? Does it allow our approach our approach allow the complaints process to continue alongside pre-action claims? And what is our organisational culture with respect to learning? Are we making the most of our complaint data and case studies to learn and improve? So about analysing what are the issues, about knowing your stock, where are the issues, and tying up all of the cases that are happening, and looking at ways to improve, pulling out those identifiable lessons, action planning, and turning them into lessons learned, so this doesn't continue to happen. So the damp and mould follow-up report, as I mentioned, the original report was published in October 2021. It's been downloaded over 5,000 times over that period to January 2023. Of particular interest, subsequently, following the death of Awab Ishak, we wrote, as Sam mentioned earlier, an open letter to all landlords reinforcing the recommendations in the original Spotlight report. And we know that many landlords have been revising their approach to damp and mould. So this follow-up report has been released to provide landlords with further insights as they continue their work in this area, as well as supporting governing bodies when reviewing self-assessments against our 26 recommendations. And after I finish talking, Mark England's going to be on talking to you from Coastline Housing about how they're working on their damp and mould. So how did we get our data for the follow-up report? Well, we contacted 40 landlords, of which 26 responded to ascertain what they'd done as a result of the original Spotlight report. These included the landlords who had been in the tables published in the original damp and mould report, those who had responded to the call for evidence, and those who were already actively engaged with us. as well as a random selection of geographically dispersed landlords of varying size. So again, we're trying to look for the whole picture. We're trying to get a rounded set of data. We found that the landlords found the original Spotlight report to be a useful intervention, although, and I'm sure you've heard this many times, the financial implications and restraints were mentioned as a potential barrier for change. So the data on the screen there, so 35% of the landlords sampled have a specific damp and mould policy, with streamlined processes for identifying and responding to damp and mould reports. 12% were in the process of implementing one, 19% are self-assessed against the 26 recommendations, and 41% of landlords who are self-assessed against the recommendations have stated that they have actually not made any changes, which is quite worrying. So I'm sure Mark's going to talk a little bit more about some of the actions they've implemented at Coastline, but from our interaction with landlords in the Spotlight follow-up report, some of the actions that landlords were taking to address damp and mould included a resident app, which was solely for damp and mould, for reporting and also for advice. They had a new video calling service specifically for damp, mould and condensation. And customers have the option of a video call with a trained damp and mould staff member to answer and support any requests they might have on it. Also having a show and tell service will help prioritise those in the greatest need, as the agent should be able to offer immediate assistance when required. So as well as that, some landlords have equipped surveyors with equipment capable of identifying cold spots, high thermal bypass rates to better identify the causes of damp and mould, and predict, and they've started using modelling tools to predict mould growth in people's homes with humidity and temperature sensor to flag when a property is at risk of mould growth, and then using that data alongside a university to understand how to reduce or even eliminate mould growth. So that's a really proactive approach, working with people who are researching actively damp and mould. Another good piece of practice which landlords working on was their voice team working closely with specialist damp contractors to try and address the issues at voice stage, so it's minimising any disruption and impacts it might have on future residents. Damp and mould in another landlord was recorded separately and monitored through a dashboard. So again, this is linking up. How does the right hand know what the left hand is doing? If you've got a dashboard, you can see all of the active damp and mould cases and look for patterns. Retrospective risk assessments have been done on all damp and mould cases to ensure resources are prioritised to address known issues, and teams have been briefed and processes in place to ensure cases are prioritised when they arise. And a predictive artificial intelligence model to identify properties at risk with an 80% accuracy risk. So that's some of the wonderful work some landlords are doing. However, there are still some areas for concern. In particular with the use of language, so using the term internal environmental factors, which basically means lifestyle, and a lack of emphasis on landlord responsibility. Another thing which landlords think is sufficient is just giving advice to residents on damp and mould. There needs to be more than that. You need to be proactive and looking at all of the issues that potentially could be causing the damp and mould. Wording again in guidance: get yourself a mould remover kit and always keep your home warm without consideration of an individual's circumstances. So thinking when fuel crisis, fuel poverty, people might not have the money to be able to do this. So educating them as well on some of the mitigating things they can do to help with damp and mould. We also found that there was a lack of engagement. So a lot of landlords were either unaware of the report's publication, or more worryingly, were aware of the report but felt it had no relevance to them and their handling of damp and mould complaints. So this is really alarming. We did have a significant lack of engagement with this, and it doesn't speak to a culture of wanting to learn from other sources within the sector. So just finally then, priority areas for action. We made a clear recommendation that landlords should continue to use the complaints procedure until legal proceedings have been issued, but we still see misinterpretation and a lack of clarity around what is actually meant by legal proceedings. So some landlords' complaint policies also exclude matters subject to legal proceedings and are not clear that this does not cover some of the pre-action protocol. Other landlord policies we have seen incorrectly state that legal proceedings means instructing a solicitor and or issuing a letter before the claim. We identified 5 myths relating to the handling of claims and complaints, and that includes the status of protocol and access, and therefore landlords should urgently review their policies that prevent appropriate action being taken and ensure communication is clear and consistent where there is a claim and a complaint. And although we have seen some good practice in the area of dignity, respect and fairness, such as the removal by landlords of the word lifestyle from all internal and external publications, there is still that culture blaming the resident and their lifestyle. Some of the language and the terminology on the landlord's websites and leaflets places the onus very much on the resident, and that the solution to the damp and mould is within the resident's control. But every resident is different. It's important that each case is dealt with on an individual basis with no assumptions being made about the case. And yesterday there was a really poignant point at a damp and mould webinar I was on. A lady said there's no silver bullet. What works in one home might not work in another. So as a minimum, landlords need to ensure they're complying with the relevant legal framework like the Equality Act, and cultural and attitudinal changes in the sector are essential to effect that positive change. And then finally, our original Spotlight report advocates for a risk-based approach to damp and mould, and key to this, landlords having better oversight of their homes. And by this, we mean knowing which of your properties are at risk, which homes need remedial treatment, and having a clear void standard and mutual exchange policy. So you've not got residents moving into properties that have outstanding damp and mould issues. And only a few landlords had actually acted on our recommendation that they needed a specific damp and mould policy, even though we know that damp and mould needs a specialist response. So what we're saying is that there needs to be a change in public policy as well, including a review and a refresh of the Decent Home Standard. So just our contact details then, if you want to get in contact with us, these are our email addresses. You can tweet us at Housing Ombuds, or sign up for our newsletter on our website, so you can have a look on there. So Sam, back over to you.
Thanks very much, Victoria. Yeah, it's a really great overview of some really important work that you've been doing, and great to see some action that's happening in this area, that actually this issue is affecting thousands, if not millions of households across the country. So yeah, it's great to have those recommendations for landlords to then put into action. Just a reminder to keep asking questions. We think the upvote function isn't working properly today, so you won't see any other people's questions in the Q&A function. But we have got a few flowing in now. Now we're going to move over to Mark England, who's Head of Innovation, Sustainability and Procurement at Coastline Housing. He's going to give us some examples of best practice in response to the recommendations that provided by the Ombudsman's report. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me along today. I'm just going to take you all sort of on a bit of a whistle-stop tour really on what we've been doing at Coastline and some of the sort of probably quite innovative things we've done, and also some very simple things. I think just from the off, what I would say is that it's so important to get your residents involved and your customers and make sure that they have some input into all of this, because otherwise it's so easy to just sort of skate past sort of things that you thought were simple and actually are not. So we've been working on sort of damp, mould and ventilation for quite a long time. It's probably a Cornish thing with our sort of weather and our high humidity down here. But we've done an awful lot of work with the University of Exeter, and I'll come on to some other projects later on. But We did a health and home project some years ago where we actually took samples of mould in various homes, and they were sort of checked to find out exactly what types they were, how they could be treated, and which properties and which type of properties tended to have the highest instance of mould. And generally, most homes had a little bit of mould somewhere. It was just a matter of sort of finding it. But the University of Exeter guys were really good at that and getting their samples away. And there's a fantastic report from Dr. Richard Sharp, who actually carried out that project. Really interesting, sort of like just to sort of alongside the mould sampling, we also did health surveys. So we surveyed all of the customers involved and asked some questions about their general health and well-being, and in particular, sort of any bronchial type issues, and respiratory issues. But it's all in that report, and it certainly helped us to focus. And this is going back some work time, probably around 13 years ago when we actually did this project. We've also had quite a lot of focus on energy projects, and we've been, I suppose, in Cornwall, we have been lucky at times where there's been quite a lot of European funding has been available to us at times. So we carried out quite a lot of works like CESP and RDF funded projects, and also used some of the general European ESIF and ESF funding. We've really concentrated on that whole energy side of our homes. And we've got homes now average of, I think, 73 or thereabouts, so sat band C. So we're in quite a good position. But a lot of that work was done quite a long time ago, and it has been taking quite a lot of effort to get there. We took this sort of approach really where we tended to insulate, and we tend to sort of always discuss sort of around insulation being king, and then sort of looking at then how you can heat the property and then what ventilation is actually required. But even then, you do, when you revisit homes, you do come across issues. So it doesn't fix everything all the time. And I'm going to come on to some examples where you might find sort of quite interesting. I think, it's really easy when you've got good quality homes to sort of sit back a little bit in the chair and think this is all good and we shouldn't have any real issues. And the customer information and advice that we had, we thought was good. And what we decided to do is basically start to sort of build up on that info. So we built our 5-year stock condition surveys. We built a little area in there just around specifically about damp, mould, what sort of size areas are they finding, and then a scoring mechanism that's slightly to one side of HHSRS, of Housing Health and Safety Rating System. We also use our voice process to feedback whether any sort of works have caused concerns around sort of damp and mould, and we do that as well with the kitchen and bathroom renewals. And we have been looking at whether we should internally insulate external walls when we do sort of things, improvements like kitchens and bathroom renewals, because there is a prevalence for getting mould, certainly under baths where they sort of abut the external wall, and kitchens underneath the units. So I do think there's an area there that we could improve and we'll be looking at in the future. Also, the heating systems tend to sort of take that on board as well and make sure that if there's any mould in the property in specific areas, that we are making sure the heating system is going to reach out to those and try to help to buffer that. Our staff have been trained, much like everybody else's staff, and that's a training program. And one of the things that we have done is we've asked all of our colleagues to take photographs as soon as they've got concerns, so we can at least go back. And a really important part of all this process is when people visit homes, if they see repairs, just report them. We can ask our customers, we can remind our customers, we can do lots and lots of things, but while you're there, it's so much easier to take a couple of photographs and just report those repairs. So we basically put a ventilation strategy in place somewhere around 3 years ago, I think the original document. We've reviewed it quite robustly at least twice since then. And we've also sort of started about 4 years ago doing damp and mould surveys of our customers. And we've then adopted that and sort of really focused on it over the last 3. Those are driven by our CRM, so customer relationship management system, and just keyword searches looking for damp, mould, condensation. And those keywords then help to sort of flag up where customers have used those when reporting issues. We then have a look at those particular neighbourhoods and decide whereabouts the main clusters are, and then we'll follow those up with the surveys themselves. And if customers don't respond to the surveys, we do actually give them, there's 2 opportunities for us on our system to give them a nudge. They're electronic surveys and the nudges are electronic as well, but we can use either email or we can use SMS, so text, just to nudge our customers and say, could you please fill the survey, and that'd be really useful for us. The survey is really quite simple, and it starts off really with the process of, do you have a fan in your kitchen, and do you have one in your bathroom? And I think we were quite surprised, actually, the number who came back saying that we didn't have specifically a fan in one of those two units. But mainly, I think the ones we came across were Cornish unit homes where they weren't in the kitchen, and that's because you can't put a hole through the wall, anyone who doesn't know, to fit an extractor fan there, so they tend to be fitted in the glazing. And we've obviously had a little bit of a breakdown somewhere in communication where those glazings units haven't been ordered or the fans haven't been fitted. The next part of that process has been, once we got the customer information back and we started to raise work orders from that for repairs or upgrades, we do then send a specialist to survey the property and find out exactly what's going on in there. I think that skill level we will build up eventually in-house, and I certainly, we can do that, but at the moment that suits us best. So this just gives you some statistics around what we've been doing the last 4 years. So we've raised over 2,000 mold, damp and condensation specialist surveys, which is a lot. We've got 5,000 homes. So if you want to sort of model that with your own properties, that will give you some sort of concept of numbers. We've done over 1,800 fan services, either repairs or the replacements of those fans. I would think, that one of the sort of questions for asset managers is what is the life of your fan units? How long are they really lasting? And do you really check them? And are they checked on things like stock condition surveys and general repairs? But we've also completed 800 customer surveys. So that's the electronic surveys that I talked about earlier on, that we've had 800 back. So we've been able to sort of progress those. There's a project here which some of you will have heard about. We spent quite a lot of time with the University of Exeter really promoting this sort of partnership. This is where we put sensors in to 300 homes. They're air quality sensors, looking at the indoor environment. And from the back of that, we've got a field of researchers, and one of their projects was actually to do some mold modelling. And a really interesting set of papers are on the Smartline website that you can see and sort of digest. But there's loads of information there around sort of like hardship and indicators of hardship, but mold modelling, and also some sort of case studies about how we've used this data. You can see we designed our own dashboard where we could get the coordinators working at Coastline on this particular project would look for anything that was sort of an anomaly, so low temperature, high humidity in a home, and they would then go contact the customer, pop and have a look, make sure everything was okay. If they were slightly concerned, then we would get either a surveyor or a specialist involved in that survey, just to make sure that it didn't drop off the radar, and we continue to sort of help those customers. But this project's been invaluable. It's been incredible value to us, and it's just within 6 years now. So, and it will come to an end in the next few months, sadly. But it's certainly something that I think most organisations, if not all, should consider, particularly where they've got any concerns about homes, using a little bit of technology just to keep a monitor on those. It will definitely give you a much better idea of what's going on. So I dropped this in here because it's slightly controversial, I suppose, but so these are our 3 properties and just data examples. These are actually from a sideline project from the main Smartline project, where we used some radon sensors from a company called Airthings. I think I'm allowed to say their name. And they were really useful. We sort of dealt with radon issues in those homes, which many of you won't have, but we do. And the other things that they measured were the humidity and the temperature in the homes. And these are sort of 3 quite drastically different graphs, and you can see that there's clearly something going on. The really annoying thing and the really sort of stark thing is these 3 properties are absolutely identical. They're the same SAT rating, have a gas boiler in each, exactly the same make and model. They're pretty well furnished the same. They've got the same ventilation, they've got the same extractor fans in them, same loft insulation and everything else. They are exactly the same. 2 of them are attached to each other. The other one is about 5 paces away. They all face the same orientation. So my message really from here is that if you think that you've got SAT band Cs or maybe better and everything is all okay, then you are sadly wrong. Until you get a little bit of tech in those homes and start to see these sort of graphs and bits of information, it's really hard to sort of unpick. So I'll take you through them very quickly. The customers in the top property had, as we found out, had two very large dogs, St. Bernard style, very big dogs. So they couldn't heat their home, and they had got very used to heating their home at around 16 to 17 degrees, and otherwise the dogs would overheat, and the humidity was naturally then increasing and had stayed very high. They did use their fans, they looked after their home. There's nothing else really to go with it other than it's the equivalent of having 4 adults within that property. The dogs go in and out and get wet and get dried inside. We actually fitted a positive input ventilation fan unit in this property, and we did remedy the issues to a certain extent, accepting that they like to keep their home at this sort of 16 to 17 degrees. That's a little bit more challenging to sort of deal with. Home on 2 is, and each of the properties had 2 residents. So these were people who work very fixed sort of shifts. So you can see the blue areas there, and when they're using their heating, that they've got it set for when they get home each day. So quite clearly, a really nice pattern. But the thing I would point out here is the mirroring of the humidity versus the temperature, and it is quite stark. It's really easy to see. The bottom property, they spend more time at home, and you can see they just use their heating controls in a really efficient way. So again, the message is don't assume anything, because the properties could be behaving in a completely different way than you think. In terms of our customer information, we got our customer scrutiny team. We opened the doors and said, let's have a look at it. Tell us what's wrong. Tell us how we could improve it all. And in 2021, they did exactly that, and set us right on what we should be producing. And then we completed another audit in November 2022, and we've made more and more updates since then. We've got lots and lots of more information coming out, and they've really, really been beneficial. And they've really got on board with us, and they want to fix things, and they want to destigmatize the whole mould sort of conversation. And off the back of that, really pleased with we're just about to release, I think they have now been released as a set of videos, which I've got here, which are the different scenarios that we produce with them under a banner that we used here as Let's Get Serious About Mould. It's now called Let's Talk About Damp and Mould on YouTube, on Coastline's website page. But they basically wanted to make these in their own words. They wanted to sort of take our ventilation policy and the whole sort of issues around damp and mould and talk through those with each other. And you'll see this set of different scenarios played out by those customers. And absolutely fantastic job they've done. We're now looking at some other ways of creating some more information in very similar sort of ways using video and that same customer group. But I think the key message was about this destigmatizing and promoting the concept that actually every customer should have a voice. And when they get mold and damp and condensation issues, or have something happen in their lifestyle that makes changes to the way they live, they should just contact us and let us know, and we can deal with that. So I hope that was somehow helpful to you. It may have just opened your eyes, it may not, but it may have just given you some examples of things that you might like to see. I hope that's been helpful. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Mark. Yeah, some really, really interesting insight into how some RSLs are dealing with these damp and mould issues and some of the kind of innovations in the sector at the moment. So I'd like to just bring the 2 speakers back in, Victoria and Mark, and also joined by Alan from the Ombudsman, Alan Park. We've got about 15 minutes for Q&A now. We've got a few questions for the speakers, so I'm just going to get cracking straight away. So the first one we've got: if all the relevant works were carried out to the insulation and to treat the damp and mould condition or condensation, but the tenant is struggling with the increase in energy costs and can't afford to heat their home sufficiently, what solutions can you recommend if adequate heating is required to reduce the problem? I've got another one that's very similar to that as well. And what do we do if the resident simply cannot afford to heat the property? Should we be moving to heat as part of the rent? I guess we'll come to the Ombudsman first for any sort of ideas around this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to field that one. I think what we're looking for is whether you can, whether the landlord has done everything within their control, everything within their gift. There are some things we can't control. If someone is genuinely unwilling to put the heating on, that's obviously a factor you're going to have to consider. But what we're looking for is an exhaustive approach, no stone unturned to try and find a solution, work with the resident, look at, the obviously the support available to them to enable them to heat their home adequately as well. And when if something comes to us, we know that the landlord can't solve every problem, but what we're looking for is that you have made every effort and looked at every possible angle and not just gone and not had this kind of, just this approach of it's just there's nothing more we can do about it. That's what we'd be looking for.
Yeah. Mark, do you have any experience kind of, particularly related to fuel poverty around dealing with these issues?
Yes, so at Coastline we set up we called it originally the hardship fund, but it's a sustainability fund. So we can actually offer some assistance where our customers are really struggling genuinely with heating bills. And at the end of the day, we're trying to look after the property as well as the people. And if that means to try and help them with some of their bills, then that's probably the right thing to do. And I think that's what a lot of the tests of these sort of issues are doing the right thing. And sometimes, customers don't, ventilate as much as we'd like them to. Sometimes they do dry clothes on the inside of their homes and things. But actually, we do go through that education process, and we sort of help to stimulate a little bit more thinking about why that might not be a great thing to do. But at the end of the day, we are responsible, and we want to take that responsibility and really help people. So I think doing the right thing is right. And if it costs you a few £100s to help some customers to sort of get back on their feet, because sometimes these are short-term issues, and we've certainly seen that through the Smartline data, where we've been able to help customers and make sure they're on the correct benefits and redirect them to things like the Winter Wellbeing Fund or indeed our own sustainability fund. So do the right thing.
Yeah, great. So I think we've got a question for you, Mark, directly, and it kind of follows on from this. So what are Coastline looking to do going forward, following on from Smartline, and what are you kind of doing with the information that you gained to potentially look at new approaches, how you might build new properties, that kind of thing? How is that data being used moving forward?
Yeah, so we've got an interesting group of projects that we're sort of looking at, and reflecting on Smartline. How do we make Smartline business as usual is sort of the key question there. So we're looking at completing a return on investment basically project that I'll be leading on over the next few months, and looking at how where the net benefits are, because there are sort of cash benefits from putting technology into homes, and just sort of very simple things like the kitchen will last longer in a home that's well ventilated and has a really good internal environment. So will the decor, so does the plaster work and all these other things. And if you're generating less repairs, and actually other parts of the business, such as finance, don't see as many invoices coming through. So, there are lots of different things that you could be doing. I think the other side of that is in terms of new build homes, looking at different types of ventilation systems and trying to work out which is the best one for us. So mechanical ventilation heat recovery feels like the right place for us to go. So it's looking at how we invest in our homes and whether we change our specifications to move towards those. We've been fitting a lot of positive input ventilation systems in our retrofit where we've had issues, and they definitely work. I'm not saying it's the best solution in the world, but they definitely work, and we have graphs and statistics that show how well they can operate. But they do add another slight cost to the customer, and they also are, just by their nature, they are pushing a little bit of heat out of the property every time a window or door is open. But that is how they operate, and that's one of those things. So we've got lots and lots of projects on the go, and certainly looking at how we can monitor homes across the board, and welcome anyone who wants to sort of have a bit of a collaborate on that and have a think about it. I've got various sort of concepts of how we might be able to finance that, but it's quite a big piece of work, and to get to do it as business as usual is quite an investment, so we do need to do that carefully.
Yeah, we've certainly, with some of our work as social landlords, certainly seen the impact that ventilation can have on dealing with these issues. So it's an area that probably is under considered, but it is actually really key to dealing with them. So would we be able to, from the Ombudsman's perspective, is there somewhere where landlords can go to look at more ideas of best practice like Mark's? Is there a resource where they can find that kind of information so that they can look for ideas about how they might approach their own damp and mould issues?
That one might be best asked by Victoria, who is leading part of our sector development team. And one of the things that our sector development team is doing is looking at what best practice we need to put out there for landlords, sharing the intelligence, not just from damp and mold, but from all of the work that we do. What can we put out there to be more proactive, to say, look, these are the kind of things. I don't know if Victoria wants to say a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. Yeah, so we've just started on a new project where we're going to be launching a centre for learning, which will be a one-stop shop for landlords who are members with us and others, residents as well, to access a range of learning resources, including having specific learning packages, and by that I don't mean just webinars, I mean like workshops, I mean e-learning, downloadable toolkits and resources, as well as having an area to network and share best practice, differentiated to each of the different roles that are within landlord organisations. So there'll be once the Centre for Learning is up and running, which will be going throughout this year, we'll be adding more and more resources on there, more and more examples of best practice. We'll put things on there about specific topics like damp and mould. We'll be putting a lot more on there about all of our spotlight reports as they go out. So I would say keep an eye on the HOS website, the Housing Ombudsman website, because over the next year we're going to be significantly increasing the amount of resources and the amount of best practice and lessons learned and examples. There's going to be loads of stuff on there. So yeah, keep an eye on our website.
Great. Really, some really useful resources. So if that's something that you're interested in, please do go and look on the website. We've had some questions that are kind of directly related to resolving, solutions to resolving mould issues. So things like mould washes and using humidity sensing fans in bathrooms where there's mould elsewhere. These sorts of questions about what works aren't necessarily what this is looking for. It's looking for a proactive approach, I guess. It'd be great to hear the Ombudsman on these specific technologies and actually whether it matters what you're using or whether it's actually the approach you're taking.
Yeah, I mean, what we'd say is that and as Mark said in his presentation, there is no one solution. We wish there was, but there isn't that silver bullet. What it's about is accurately diagnosing what is going on, knowing your stock. So it might be similar types of properties have similar problems, things like that, and having a range of interventions available to you to accurately deal with that specific issue. We can't say that it's always going to be a mold wash, or it's always going to be, because every single instance is different. And I was on a webinar a couple of weeks ago where one of the landlords that have been doing a lot of proactive work said that in all of the cases they'd encountered, it wasn't, we talk about lifestyle, lifestyle was not the main factor. There was always something else. There was always an underlying cause in all of the things that they'd been doing since the damp and mold report. So I think what we're looking for is that really open-minded approach to both the diagnosis and what's going on, and as new technologies and new things come online, what we've heard from Coastline today, really being open to kind of new solutions and new interventions. But there's no one solution.
Yeah, I think that's a good message. On that, I think there's a good question here for Mark related to kind of in-house resource. So how much in-house resource is dedicated to analysing the data you're getting about damp and mould, and is it something that is easily accessible for all landlords?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because there's two elements to it for ours. So in terms of SmartLine, that standalone project, most of the resource from there was really there were two full-time equivalents who were coordinating SmartLine, which meant they did a whole host of things. It wasn't just damp and mould, including neighbourhood greening projects, supporting customer groups, coffee mornings, and a whole heap of stuff through COVID as well. So I'm going to put that to one side because there's a bank of researchers also in the background with the university who are extrapolating information and sort of looking for trends and questioning us about why does that happen and how do we fix this. But in-house, so the things that we built slowly as we've gone along over the last few years, certainly our in-house approach has been that we have our customer service team who initiate those sort of damp and surveys to our customers. We have an in-house services team who carry out all the repairs and maintenance for us. They have an interest in those sort of areas that come through. So we're not spending heaps and heaps of time. We're not calling meetings every week and analysing the data. what we're doing is asking key individuals just say, have a look at that. Is there somewhere specific that seems to be? You don't need very much technical knowledge to do that, because you're looking at an address list and looking for predominance, looking for how many properties in which area, and that's the area that we will then target next. So we haven't thrown lots and lots of resources at this at all, let's be honest.
Yeah, great. Well, I mean, it's really good, and really good to know that landlords can engage with these sorts of technologies and approaches. We've got a question about the 3 identical homes that you mentioned, Mark, and the question is around the measures determining that they're identical. Are they kind of too blunt? Because, you know, every home should we see it as unique anyway, and you know, is it because they have, you know, different inhabitants that they actually become different, and the impact is different within those properties?
Yes, so from the bricks and sticks point of view, it's probably the simplest way. They are identical. They've got exactly the same boilers in them, the same construction, built at the same time. They're linked. 2 of them are semi-detached, so they're attached to each other, and the other one is, you know, literally 5 meters away. They all face the same orientation, have the same size windows, door positions, and everything else. 2 are mirrored, so they are opposites, but they're identical in every other way. So this is about how, I suppose, how houses behave when they're under different sorts of stresses and pressures. And you saw that the top one is under a very different situation than the very bottom one. And the middle one, again, is in its own sort of unique position. It's really interesting that 3 of them are in a row, and that's why I sort of use those as examples, because if they're in 3 different areas of Cornwall, one might be sort of north facing, sat right up on the coast, and on one sort of in the middle of one of our towns. But identical from that perspective, yes. The way they behave and the way they adapt or not to the way that customers do live, and I'm not pointing the lifestyle sort of finger at anybody, but what we actually need is we need to sort of start to react to those properties and the way they behave, and start thinking about, actually, we just need to change the ventilation unit in that property, and it's fixed, and it's fixed forever. You know, it's. And rather than sort of saying, actually, it's because of the way you're behaving and your lifestyle is breaking our property, so please can you stop it, because that's not going to work. This is about sort of finding solutions and being realistic about things. The middle property we've done very little with. We've done some education stuff there, and we've had a chat with them, and we've given some energy advice so they could use the heating a little bit more. But actually, their lifestyle is, you know, the way they work, the shift patterns that they have. They're very, very happy, and the property's not in disrepair, doesn't have mold in it at all. So I think what I would say is you have to react to the situations that are put in front of you. And I think one of the things we use in technology is it forces you to do something because you wouldn't have known otherwise. And we know that we fixed that property. Ironically, those customers have moved on, but that's not really an issue for us. But we did fix it while they were still living there with the same occupancy levels, with the 2 big dogs wandering about. And we did fix it just with a really simple positive input ventilation unit.
Yeah, I think it's a great illustration of what's coming out of the reports and the recommendations, that you know, no one approach fits every circumstance. So you've got to take this kind of unique approach to every issue. So actually, we've just come to the end of time here. We don't have any time for any more questions. There are quite a few more questions. We can have a look through those and maybe provide some answers in an email afterwards. Just to flag that we do have another webinar coming up in May that's going to focus on some of the examples that we have, our experience working with landlords and looking at resolving the issues of damp and mould and looking at the root cause. So that's one that will probably give you a bit more insight into some of these best practice type behaviours and strategies to deal with damp and mould. Just like to thank our speakers today. So Victoria King from the Housing Ombudsman and Mark England from Coastline, and also Alan Park at the end there for his